Before I call the Home Secretary for the statement, I should inform the House that the inquest into the death of Chris Carver has been opened and adjourned, so the matter is therefore technically still before the courts. However, Mr Speaker has granted a waiver in relation to the House's resolution on matters sub judice, so that members may refer to it in the House's proceedings. And I call the Home Secretary.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I would like to update the House on Monday's verdict in the trial of Sergeant Martin Blake, on the accountability review into police use of force, and on confidence in policing. Chris Carver was killed in Streatham 2 years ago. His parents and family, of course, continue to experience deep grief and distress. A year ago, Sergeant Martin Blake was charged with murder, and on Monday, the jury returned their verdict, and Sergeant Blake was acquitted. It is imperative that the jury's verdict is respected, and that Sergeant Blake and his family are given the time and space that they will need to recover from what will have been an immensely difficult experience for them during both the investigation and the trial. For an armed police officer to be prosecuted for actions taken in the course of their duties is very rare, so of course this case has raised considerable concerns for the public and the police. The decisions made on any individual case, be it by the police, the Independent Office of Police Conduct, the Crown Prosecution Service, the courts or the jury, are rightly independent of the government. So it would not be right for me to comment further on the details in this case. But this case has happened against a backdrop of wider and long-standing concerns about accountability, standards and confidence. A backdrop in which police officers and forces have raised long-standing concerns about the way in which the accountability system currently operates, particularly in cases of specialist policing like firearms and driving, where we ask officers to do incredibly difficult and dangerous jobs to keep us safe. And a backdrop of fallen community confidence in policing and the criminal justice system across the country, with, as the Metropolitan Police Commissioner has said this week, lower confidence among black communities. Madam Deputy Speaker, the British policing model relies on mutual bonds of trust between the public and the police. For our policing model to work, it is essential that the police have the confidence of the communities they serve, and that officers have the confidence they need to do their vital and often extremely difficult job of keeping us all safe. Too often in recent times, both elements of that confidence have become frayed, and this government has made it a mission to put confidence back into policing. So as part of that work, I want to update the House on new measures that we will take forward in response to the accountability review and following ongoing work to respond to issues raised by the previous Angelini and Casey reviews. A package of reforms to rebuild confidence for police officers and for communities, to tackle the unacceptable delays and confusion in the system, ensuring the complexity of specialist operations is considered at an early stage, and ensuring that the highest standards are upheld and maintained. 12 months ago, the previous government launched a review into the accountability systems for police use of force and police driving. The previous Home Secretary set out an interim response in March, which the Labour Party supported, and I welcome the work that my predecessor did. The review was not completed by the election, and whilst we have continued to draw on evidence from police and civil society organisations, we were unable to say more publicly in the run-up to the trial. So today I want to update the House. The accountability review found that the current system for holding police officers to account is not commanding the confidence of either the public or the police. Accountability and misconduct proceedings are too often plagued by delays stretching for years, which are damaging for complainants, officers and forces alike. And the system has become much more complex, with confusion over multiple thresholds for different investigations, a lack of clarity, especially involving specialist capabilities. There are also wider concerns about the misconduct system, because the focus when things go wrong can end up being entirely on the decisions of the individual officer, so system failings like poor training, unmanageable caseloads or wider force practices are not sufficiently considered or followed up, so too little changes. And at the same time, we saw, following the Casey and Angelini reviews, in cases where someone is not fit to be a police officer, it is too hard for forces to remove them, and communities feel that no one is held to account. So the public must be able to expect that where officers exceed the lawful use of their powers or fail to meet proper standards, there will be rapid and robust processes in place to hold them to account. And police officers who act with integrity and bravery to keep us safe each day need to know they have strong public support. Because if officers lack the confidence to use their powers following their training and the law, then public safety is put at risk. So let me turn to the policy measures. First, we will take forward the 3 measures proposed by the previous government in March to strengthen and speed up the system. We will align the threshold for the referral of police officers from the Independent Office of Police Conduct to the Crown Prosecution Service to that used by the police when referring cases involving members of the public. Currently, that threshold is lower for police officers, and that is not justified. We will allow the IOPC to send cases to the CPS where there is sufficient evidence to do so instead of having to wait for a final investigation report. And we will put the IOPC victims' right to review policy on a statutory footing to ensure there's an appeal mechanism for bereaved families when a decision is made not to seek a charging decision. And then we will go further. When officers act in the most dangerous situations on behalf of the state, it is vital that those officers and their families are not put in further danger during any subsequent legal proceedings. So we will therefore introduce a presumption of anonymity for firearms officers subject to criminal trial following a police shooting in the course of their professional duties up to the point of conviction. We will also ensure that the highly specialist nature of particular policing tactics and tools are reflected in relevant investigative guidance. That includes ensuring that in investigations of police driving incidents, evidence from subject matter experts and in-car video footage is considered at the earliest possible opportunity, and that more widely, an officer's compliance with their training and guidance is appropriately taken into account in investigative decision-making. I've also established a rapid review of 2 specific areas where recent legal judgments have now meant we have different thresholds for criminal misconduct and inquest investigations, adding complexity, confusion and delay to the system. In particular, it will look at the legal test for use of force in misconduct proceedings and the threshold for determining short-form findings of unlawful killing in inquests. The independent review will be conducted by Tim Godwin and the Right Honourable Sir Adrian Fulford and will report jointly to myself and to the Lord Chancellor by the end of January. And I've asked for further work to be done on timeliness standards and misconduct procedures as part of our wider policing reforms. My Right Honourable friend, the Attorney-General, has also invited the Director of Public Prosecutions to examine the CPS guidance and processes in relation to charging police officers for offences committed in the course of their duties. And following calls from civil society organisations, we will ask the College of Policing to establish a national lessons learned database for deaths or serious injuries arising from police contact or police pursuits, so there is a responsibility to ensure that lessons are incorporated into the development of police training and guidance when tragic incidents occur and to prevent the repetition of such events in future. And to rebuild wider public confidence in the wider standard regimes for policing, we also need to ensure that there is faster progress in responding to the findings of the Angelini and Casey reviews on vetting and standards. So we will therefore take forward in this parliamentary session some previously agreed proposals to ensure that officers convicted of certain criminal offences are automatically found to have committed gross misconduct and create a presumption of dismissal where gross misconduct is found. We will change regulations to enable Chief Constables to promptly dismiss officers who fail their vetting, which has been a glaring gap in the system for too long. And we will go further to ensure standards are upheld. We will ensure statutory underpinning for national vetting standards and strengthen requirements relating to the suspension of officers under investigation for domestic abuse or sexual offences. Finally, we need to ensure that there are wider measures to restore confidence in policing and the criminal justice system across all communities. That must include further work to take forward the Met's London Race Action Plan, where action has already been taken, but where the Met Commissioner and Mayor for London have both made clear there is much more work to do. And we need to see progress from the National Police Chiefs Council on the National Police Race Action Plan. And Madam Deputy Speaker, this government is also determined to take forward further measures ranging from the introduction of neighbourhood policing to new police force performance standards to strengthen confidence in every community across the country. The measures I've outlined are practical steps to rebuild confidence, tackle delays, provide clarity and ensure high standards are maintained. For more than 200 years, policing by consent has been the bedrock of British policing, and this government is determined to take the action necessary today, both to strengthen the confidence the public have in the police and to strengthen the confidence the police must have when they are out on the street each day doing the difficult job of keeping us all safe. Those are the twin goals we must all work towards, and I commend this statement to the House.
I call the Shadow Home Secretary, Mr James Cleverley.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And can I also thank the Home Secretary for advance sight of her statement and for the recent Privy Council briefing that I received from her. I will start off by saying I very much welcome what she's put forward today. I agree with almost all of it and disagree with almost none of it. Because as a society, we demand that our firearms officers put themselves in dangerous and difficult situations to protect others. Every firearms officer in the UK is a volunteer, and we rightly value the fact that we have a predominantly unarmed police force here in the UK, but we do of course need a cadre of armed police officers across the country. I've had the privilege of visiting the Police Firearms Training Centre in Gravesend, and I have seen firsthand just how rigorous that firearms training regime is, not just in marksmanship, but also in the use of judgment. Split-second, life or death decisions have to be made, often in circumstances where the risk picture is incomplete, and often in circumstances where the cost of not acting is considerably more severe than the cost of acting. And in all of the debate and conversation we have around the police use of force, this fundamental truth should be in the forefront of our minds. As the Right Honourable Lady has said, we rightly expect that all officers at all times act with restraint and professionalism. But we cannot allow circumstances to be created where officers are disincentivised from being decisive or become unwilling to take the right action for fear of trial by media or for fear of a long period of suspension under investigation. When my party was in government, and I am grateful for the Home Secretary acknowledging this in her statement, we started under my predecessors and led predominantly by my right honourable friend, the member for Croydon South. We initiated a review into the use of force by police officers and the accountability regime. I am very grateful, genuinely grateful, that under her leadership that is continuing. Because as she rightly says, giving confidence to police officers so that they can act in accordance with their training, but that they will not be penalised for taking those actions is absolutely key. And ensuring simultaneously that the public have confidence that police officers still have an appropriate accountability framework is equally as important. And she made the point that both of those aims are being pursued in the accountability review that she is taking forward. And the commitment that these investigations will be done more speedily is key. And specifically, that she will continue with our proposals to allow the IOPC to refer cases to the CPS earlier is important, because prolonged periods of uncertainty undermines the confidence both of police officers and the public that they serve. And I am very much pleased to see the government is continuing in our reforms to ensure that when police officers act in accordance with their training and in the line of duty, that the presumption is that they will not be held to a lower threshold for prosecutions than members of the general public. And I would ask her to seriously consider that training in these roles forms a legitimate part of the defence of officers if and when criminal prosecutions are brought forward. And I'm particularly pleased, and I very much welcome the additional move to introduce the presumption of anonymity for firearms officers subject to criminal trial following a shooting. We now know that Chris Cabba was involved with a violent gang, and that Sergeant Blake and his family had, and indeed still have, a well-founded fear of violent reprisals. And that fear was amplified when Sergeant Blake's name was put in the public domain. Can I ask the Right Honourable Lady, in light of the review by Dr. Gillian Fairfield, which further of her recommendations she is minded to take forward? And will she recognise, in the era of social media, that all people of public profile, including members of this House, should be very thoughtful and careful about making public statements when facts are unknown or contested? Because the police should know instinctively that they will have the backing of both their chain of command and and politicians involved in their governance at all levels when they do the right thing at our behest, and they will be backed by their chain of command even if those actions are not popular or convenient, because we have seen too often police leadership bend to inappropriate levels of public pressure. So in conclusion, Madam Deputy Speaker, I welcome this statement from the Home Secretary today and her commitment to take forward the reforms of the Police Accountability Review. And we will, of course, on this side of the House, my benches, we will work constructively with her to ensure the appropriate balance is struck to reinforce confidence in policing and of policing. Thank you.
Home Secretary.
Can I thank the Shadow Home Secretary for his response? And this is an area where I hope there will actually be wide agreement across all sides of the House on the importance of these issues, the fact that it does go to the heart of that British tradition of policing by consent, where all of us want to know that, of course, there is proper accountability in place for decisions that police forces and police officers make, but we also have to know that the police have the confidence to take sometimes the most difficult decisions of all in order to keep the rest of us safe. And he is right that firearms officers really do have to deal with some of the most difficult parts of policing of all, sometimes having to make split-second decisions in the most fast-moving and difficult circumstances that none of us would want to be in. And frankly, if any of us were in those situations, we would want to know that there were firearms police officers there to be able to protect us and to be able to support us. Firearms in the UK discharged by police officers is actually very rare. It's very low compared particularly to other countries. That reflects the nature of our unarmed policing tradition, but also their professionalism and training and the different ways in which they manage often very difficult situations. But of course they need to know that where they are following their training, operating within the law, that they have our support in the difficult decisions that they have to take, and they don't find that their lives are upturned as a result. The anonymity provisions, I think, are very important, and I hope we'll have support from the whole House, and we want to bring those in, the presumption of anonymity. We would like to bring those in as part of the forthcoming crime and policing bill. He also raised the issue of training. And as I particularly want the issue training to be looked at as part of the updating of the investigative guidance, where it needs to clearly can be addressed relatively quickly to ensure that issues, for example, around police driving, but also more widely use of training in other areas as well, is taken into account as part of those early investigative decisions before cases pursue through the process as well. On the the Fairfield review, we are taking forward further measures, and particularly we'll be looking at the way in which the IOPC it needs to work as part of the wider policing reform. It's really important we continue to have an independent process in place. But I think this also has to fall against a backdrop of the wider reforms that we need to do with policing to make sure that we can strengthen confidence both for officers and for communities, because that is how we will maintain that proud British policing tradition of policing by consent for the new generation.
Mother of the House, Diane Abbott.
First of all, I'd like to express my sympathy for Chris Cabba's family and his mother. Because whatever he was or did, he was her son, and she deserves our sympathy and respect. I would also like to acknowledge my colleague, the member for Clapham and Brixton Hill, who's worked hard to support the family in challenging circumstances. In the past few days, there has been an avalanche of information about Chris Cabba. But to those who are asking why this information was not made available to the jury, that was the decision of the judge, and they should put their complaints to the judge. The Home Secretary will know that over the years there's been a series of deaths at the hands of the Metropolitan Police. They have led to deep unhappiness and even riots. One death that comes to mind is that in 1985 of Cynthia Jarrett, who died of a heart attack when 4 policemen burst into her house. Her death triggered the Broadwater Farm riots. So does the Home Secretary accept that nothing could be more damaging for police-community relations than if the idea took hold that in some way the police were above the law?
Can I thank my right honourable friend for the points that she has made. I know that these are issues that she has long experience in working on and addressing through many years, and how important she sees this as. And she is right to raise concerns that are felt around incidents where lives are lost, and to recognise the distress that will be felt by Chris Cabba's mother, by his family. And I also recognise my honourable friend, the member for Clapham and Brixton Hill's work to support the family in difficult circumstances. She makes an important point about that these decisions at every stage in the process have to be about those for the independent judiciary, for the courts, for the police prosecutors, and that our role in this House is to provide the framework within which those decisions are then made individually. But I also agree with her that ultimately at the heart, all these measures have to have the confidence of communities across London and of communities across the country, because if they don't, then that proud British tradition of policing by consent is lost, and that is deeply damaging for police officers and for policing, as well as for all of our public safety.
Liberal Democrat spokesperson Lisa Smart.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I also thank the Home Secretary for advance sight of her statement. Any case in which a young person's life is cut short is a tragedy, and my thoughts are with all of those who are impacted by this awful situation. It is crucial that we in this place respect the judiciary and their right to make decisions without political interference. However, a case like this does not happen in a vacuum, and we must remember the wider context. As Baroness Casey said in her review, black Londoners are underprotected and over-policed. A huge and radical step is required to regain police legitimacy and trust among London's black communities. These findings cannot and should not be ignored. That means working together to rebuild community relationships and trust in the police, something that is vital to the very fabric of policing by consent. And with that in mind, I welcome the Home Secretary's commitment to pick up the accountability review. And when it comes to firearms officers' accountability when operating under enormous pressure, ambiguity benefits nobody, not police officers, and certainly not our communities. I would, however, welcome more details from the Home Secretary about how those communities with the least trust in the police, especially ethnic minority communities, will be consulted in this review. And these questions extend past the Met, Madam Deputy Speaker. So will other police forces, including my own Greater Manchester Police, be involved in the review? And will the Home Secretary commit to commissioning an independent review on the implementation of the Casey Review's recommendations? Because rebuilding trust in the police has got to be our priority. It's for the sake of our whole community and for ethnic minority communities, and also for the officers who are working hard to keep us safe in difficult circumstances. Thank you.
I thank the Honourable Member for the important point that she makes. She's right that lack of clarity, the uncertainty, and I think also the long delays, the damaging delays that we've had in the system benefit no one. She's also right to say that the part of the sensitivity for this case, but part of the backdrop, the long-standing backdrop, has been the much lower confidence in policing among Black Londoners, the different levels of confidence around race. It's why that was highlighted as part of the Casey Review, and why the Met Police have set out a race action plan, but where both the Met Commissioner and the Mayor of London have been clear that there is significant additional work to do, because any measures, if they don't have the confidence of all communities that the police serve, in the end undermine those crucial principles around policing by consent. So we are continuing to work to ensure that the measures, some of the measures recommended by the Casey Review that have national implications, and the Angelini Review as well, are also being taken forward as part of this package, and that includes issues around vetting and misconduct processes. It's really important that we make progress on those measures, as well as some of the issues that arise around accountability review, and we will also make sure that all communities are involved in the way in which measures are taken forward.
Bell Ribeiro-Addy.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I thank the Home Secretary for her statement that fatal shooting of Chris Carver caused pain to his family and considerable fear and anger, not only in my community, but across London. And this House must understand that the concerns being raised are not anti-police, but pro-accountability. Madam Deputy Speaker, we must respect our legal processes, and it's extremely rare that police officers ever face such prosecution. The Home Secretary clearly agrees that whilst police officers work under exceptional pressures, that any loss of life following police contact must be properly investigated. So is she concerned by comments from the Metropolitan Police Commissioner regarding disciplinary processes, including that firearms officers should be exempt from criminal charges over fatal shootings? This would do nothing to rebuild broken trust and confidence, particularly within the Black community, who have been disproportionately impacted. Following the Angelini and Casey reviews, is less accountability really the route that the head of the Met should be asking for?
Well, I thank the Honourable Member for her question. I know, as I said, she has worked really hard to represent her communities, and it's clear that there has to be a proper framework for legal accountability for police forces, for individual officers. There must always be investigations where there is loss of life following police contact. That's always appropriate. We do want to see investigations take place much more swiftly. But I would also say that all of the police chiefs that I have talked to as part of the work on this, I think all feel very strongly that there has to be a clear accountability system in place, and also one that makes sure that it provides confidence both for communities and for police officers who are making difficult decisions in the line of the duty. And I think both police and Parliament and the public would recognise you have to do both of those things, have the confidence of communities and the confidence of police officers to do their job.
Chair of the Home Affairs Select Committee, Diane Bradley.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker, and can I thank the Home Secretary for her statement and for advance sight of the statement. What she's announced is welcome, and but clearly many of these measures will take time to introduce. So could I ask her what she's doing in the meantime to ensure that there is confidence throughout the system, and also if she can ensure the Home Affairs Select Committee is kept updated of progress in making sure these changes, welcome changes, are made?
The Chair of the Home Affairs Select Committee for those important points. We are working at pace. We obviously plan legislation we have set out in the King's Speech, the Crime and Policing Bill, and there are a series of areas where we believe these measures can be taken forward as part of that process. We will also have some areas that we may be able to make progress through regulations, and other areas which are simply about changing the guidance. And we have set out some timetables as part of the briefing that will be made public and that people will be able to find on the Home Office website to be able to get more detail on the individual measures. And I will certainly ensure this afternoon that all of those details are sent to the Home Affairs Committee.
Florence Eshalomi.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Home Secretary for her statement this morning. And I also want to commend my friend, the member for Clapham and Brixton Hill. Shortly after the tragic shooting, she organised a meeting with the family of Chris Cabba. And no matter what we think about an individual, we have to remember that for any parent to bury their child is really tragic. And when I met Prosper and Helen, the pain in their eyes in what had happened will not leave me. And I also want to pay tribute to our officers across Lambeth and Southwark who work very hard with our community in building that community relations. And often we find ourselves in our borough with police from outside of the borough coming in to cause some of the issues, but those police officers work very hard who know our patch. So just on that, I want to ask the Home Secretary, she mentioned that this issue isn't on a backdrop. It's on a backdrop of longer-standing concerns on accountability. Does she agree, following the cases review, in terms of making sure that the issue around institutional racism, that she will continue to hold the Met Police to account on their progress on the race action plan?
My honourable friend makes a really important point about we need to see progress around the Met Police Race Action Plan that responds to serious findings, very serious findings in the Casey review. There are wider issues that the Casey review raised as well, but it is essential that that action is taken. I know that both the Mayor and the Met Commissioner have made strong commitments to ensure that progress continues to be made, and I know that London MPs will also want to see that action taken. We cannot have reports just take place and then not have the follow-up for them.
Sir Gavin Williamson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and very much like to welcome the Home Secretary's statement. There is a lot of concern in my constituency about the fact that Sergeant Blake was prosecuted in the first place, and we are also conscious of the amazing work that our wonderful police are doing for us to keep us safe every single day. Would the Home Secretary set out in more detail what additional protections are going to be there to ensure that our police are protected as they go about their job protecting us?
I thank the honourable member for his question. So the reforms that we've set out following this wide examination of the different evidence will mean that where there are investigations, and there will need to be investigations in individual cases, that they can happen much more speedily, and also that the threshold is no longer lower for referring cases from the Independent Office of Police Conduct to the CPS than it is currently for members of the public when they are investigated for a crime, because I think that is not justified, it is not appropriate, and it's right that that threshold should be brought back in line. We also want to make sure that issues around training, issues around the specialist capabilities are taken account at a very early stage in investigations, and that is why we'll be revising the guidance for investigations to make sure that that happens. And the Attorney General has asked the Director for Public Prosecutions to review CPS guidance on charging in cases where officers use force in the line of duty in those cases, as I referred to earlier in the statement. So a series of areas where we are making sure that the system can work more effectively, but this is crucially, this is about raising confidence for the public as well as about raising confidence for police officers.
Kim Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'd like to thank the Home Secretary for her statement. I'd also like to send my condolences to the family, friends and loved ones of Chris Caber, particularly this week while the media are using racist gang tropes to justify the killing of Chris Caber. 1,900 people have died in police custody since 1990. 1990, and I would say that the police do have protections. You know, we know that our black communities are over-policed and under-supported. So can the Home Secretary give us assurances that we and our communities are kept safe and that extra protections are not given to the police because they already have the protections they need?
Well, I set out to my honourable friend. I think the framework that I set out is about ensuring that there is a proper system for accountability for police forces and for police officers, which I think all police officers will support and think is immensely important in the way in which they use their powers. But it also we have to tackle the huge long delays in the system. We have to tackle the complexity in the system, the different thresholds that take place, the fact that there are real concerns, that specialist capabilities and certainly areas around both driving and firearms are just not taken into account at an early stage in the investigations, and that can end up with serious problems much later on, which mean that firearms officers or other police officers feel like they don't have the confidence or clarity about their responsibilities and the way in which they can use their powers, but equally so that communities don't feel that they are being let down because they don't have timely investigations and conclusions and answers to their concerns.
Lee Anderson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Sergeant Blake has gone through 2 years of a living hell for simply doing his duty and keeping the British public safe. So will the Home Secretary join us at Reform UK in commending his bravery to send out a clear message to all our brave police officers that this place has their backs?
Police officers who do immensely difficult work right across the country every day to keep us safe deserve our strong support, often in the most difficult circumstances of huge bravery. It's why I have attended the Police Bravery Awards every year for 14 years to recognise and support the work that police officers do, often in the most difficult of circumstances. I think those officers all believe that it's really important that we have a system where communities can feel confident in the work that police officers do, and also that they, as officers, can continue to do that work to keep us safe every single day.
Home Affairs Select Committee member Sean Davis.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I pay tribute to the majority of police officers who go to work and do a decent job, and often it's police officers themselves are as disgusted as the general public when there is misconduct taking place within police forces. Does my honourable friend the Home Secretary agree with me, though, that there is a connection between the delays of police investigations, delays in the criminal justice system, and then delays in misconduct hearings? And these things have to be taken in the round. In my community, we have the case of Diane Atkinson, who was killed by a police officer who is now serving time in prison after the use of a taser. Will the review also look at the use of tasers as well in the work of the review?
Well, one of the points that we want the College of Policing to do is to be able to set up the lessons learned database to make sure that there is actually action that is taken, for example, where there are deaths or serious injuries following police contact. Because too often, even when those cases are investigated and reforms or measures and recommendations are made, too often those are not followed up, they are not actually implemented, and as a result, bereaved families can feel badly let down. So it's really important that we have both a clear framework around standards, but also to make sure that when things do go wrong, there is actually a proper system in place to ensure that lessons are learned and things can be improved for the future.
So, Judy Lewis.
I'm sure most fair-minded people will feel that the Home Secretary has got the balance exactly right, particularly as she's now brought in this presumption of anonymity. But can I draw her attention to a surprisingly detailed report by the court correspondent of the Evening Standard, who seems to have had access to police intelligence reports about a £10,000 reward being offered by gangs to be able to identify and presumably wreak reprisals against the sergeant concerned. What's concerning to me is that a Metropolitan Police spokesman says this was investigative and protective measures taken. The investigation is now closed. I would have thought that if there were intelligence indicating that a hit was being arranged, the investigation should not be closed until the perpetrators were themselves arrested.
Well, I thank the Honourable Member for that question, because it's clearly important that police officers who do find themselves facing threats or risks as a result of the job that they do, as a result of the difficult situations that they find themselves into because of their work to keep us safe, it's really important that those police officers have strong protection and support. He will know that I cannot comment on an individual case and certainly not on an individual investigation. Those are rightly independent operational decisions for police forces. But I think more widely everyone will want to make sure that officers who do difficult jobs do have the support they need.
Home Affairs Select Committee Member Jake Richards.
Deputy Chair, the balance between ensuring that our police have the powers and the tools they need to keep our streets safe, but also ensuring that they are not above the law, is a delicate one. And in that light, I welcome the Home Secretary's statement and indeed the response from the Shadow Home Secretary. Does the Home Secretary agree with me, however, that some of the comments yesterday on the media, and indeed from members of the House, such as the Right Honourable Member for Newark, are unhelpful? Because, in fact, we need to consider all the evidence carefully, in a constructive and calm way when considering this really important issue, and not rush to conclusions on the back of media reports.
Well, my honourable friend makes an important point. There's it's important British tradition that we have in our respect for the rule of law, which is that individual decisions are made by the police, by prosecutors, by the courts, by juries, independently of anything that the government does, independently of anything that politicians do or say. We do all operate within legal frameworks, as Madam Deputy Speaker reminded us at the beginning of this debate, and I'm sure all of us would want to respect that, but also to support all of those independent institutions in the complex and challenging work they do. We can set the framework, but they have to take the individual decisions.
Josh Barrowinday.
Madam Deputy Speaker, when I first started my work supporting young people in London out of crime and gangs, it was the case that 75% of violent crime in London was committed by people aged under 30, and they were 4 times more likely to be victims of crime themselves. In order for the police to help get on top of this, there must be restored confidence between young people and the police, which has been so eroded in recent years. But we must also invest in community policing as well, so cut by the last government. What will the Home Secretary do to rectify those things and give young people the trust in the police that they need and deserve?
Remember, it's a really important point, because when we talk sometimes about trust and confidence for communities, very often it can be young people who can often be those who have the most contact with the police who feel left out of those discussions about community confidence. It's really important that they also have confidence in the police to keep them safe. And I think restoring neighbourhood policing, having those community police officers back in communities who know the local area, who young people can also get to know, is one of the most important and powerful ways to rebuild that trust and to make sure that everybody can have the confidence. That's also how you prevent crime and damage in communities too.
Mike Tapp.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Remaining anonymous until conviction is important. I fully back this statement. As the Home Secretary will know, it's not just officers facing trial, but also their families that have to go through the intimidation and threats. Justice is, of course, essential, as is protecting our brave officers. Will the Home Secretary join me in acknowledging the huge toll that these policing roles can take, not just on officers, but also on their families?
I agree with my honourable friend. It's families who often can face some of the most challenging burdens and pressures, and often when you hear from police officers, it's their concern about the impact on their families does affect them very strongly, and that's why I think this presumption of anonymity to the point of conviction is really important to support families as well as officers.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And firstly, I want to put on record my support and gratitude to all our frontline police officers in the firearms departments for the difficult, challenging and high-pressure work that they do, including Sergeant Blake and, of course, his family. Now, there's much to commend, Home Secretary, in your statement, and I welcome it. In particular, the anonymity for officers facing investigation, and also that you've got a timeline for this review, which I think is really important to maintain. There are two critical words that come up in your statement: confidence and accountability. And I think there's a lot of concern that confidence in the Independent Office for Police Conduct and confidence in the Crown Prosecution Service is falling. In fact, amongst police officers, in particular those in the firearms department, I think confidence, frankly, is collapsing. And that is not a good place to be. And even the jury of the Chris Cabba case wrote a letter to the judge that they wanted read out, that he decided not to read out, where they expressed astonishment and a lack of confidence in the IOPC and the CPS. So here's the accountability point. The accountability is not just on police officers, but also, Home Secretary, on the IOPC and the CPS. Does she still have confidence in the leadership of the IOPC and the CPS, or should that be changed?
Well, the Home Secretary responds. When you use the word you, you're speaking to the Chair. Home Secretary, short and sharp so we can get everybody in.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Accountability Review found that the accountability system doesn't currently have confidence for communities or for policing, and that is why we're setting out very practical reforms. It's really important that the work that the CPS, that the IOPC do is done independently of politicians, of police officers and of communities as well, and they have to take decisions within the law and within the framework that Parliament sets, and that's why this review and this announcement is about how we amend that framework so that they can do their jobs.
Amanda Martin.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Last Saturday in my constituency in Portsmouth North in Paulsgrove, I held a joint coffee morning with the local police, giving an opportunity for residents to raise concerns directly with officers and to encourage the sign-up to the Portsmouth Police's Let's Talk. It's a platform for sharing information and concerns directly with the public. Does the Home Secretary agree with me that one of the ways to rebuild public confidence in policing is to restore visible local patrols and rebuild the community policing that has been eroded over many years?
I agree with my honourable friend. Restoring or rebuilding confidence around policing and communities means that neighbourhood policing has to be at the heart.
Dr. Kieran Miller.
And I welcome the statement today, much of what the Home Secretary has said. The police officers that we're talking about, including Martin Blake, are often deployed to protect local communities from violent criminal gang members, as he was doing. Does the Home Secretary agree with me that for a local MP to describe one such community violent gang member as a well-loved member of the community, and for the Runnymede Trust to describe it as a police officer who is subject to a full court hearing and process as unaccountable, actually undermines rather than builds community confidence?
It's really important that we have confidence, the whole confidence of communities in the police and the confidence of police to be able to do their jobs. Decisions on individual cases are rightly those for independent organisations, whether that be for the courts, whether that be for the misconduct process. But those have to operate within a framework, and it's our responsibility to make sure that that framework is right, and it currently isn't right, and that's why we have set out the reforms within which those organisations need to take decisions.
Jonathan Hinder.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I want to thank my right honourable friend, the Home Secretary, for her timely and important announcement today. My former colleagues in the police service up and down our country run towards danger on the public's behalf. They pursue dangerous criminals on the public's behalf. And very rarely, as we've heard today, sometimes they have to use lethal force on the public's behalf. Does the Home Secretary agree with me that if our police officers do not have the confidence to do those things, it is the law-abiding public who will ultimately suffer?
Well, my honourable friend's right that in the end the important issue around confidence and maintaining confidence from everyone, from police, from communities, is that ultimately if communities don't have confidence then policing's undermined, but if the police officers don't have confidence then our public safety is undermined because it means they can't do their job, and that's why we put confidence at the heart of our mission for safer streets.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I too welcome the Home Secretary's statement and plan. Firearms officers are highly skilled specialists, and my constituents are concerned that cases like this one will disincentivise our brave police officers from taking that additional responsibility of carrying firearms. Can the Right Honourable Lady comment on what she is hearing about recruitment and retention of firearms officers so that we can reassure the public that armed police officers will be available should we need them? Home Secretary.
The Honourable Member makes an important point, because one of the concerns was being raised as part of the accountability review was concerns around recruitment and retention, especially when people are concerned about the impact on their families. And I think it's that family issue that is so important. But that's why I think issues around the presumption of anonymity to the point of conviction and some of these wider reforms, I hope will maintain confidence for communities and for police officers.
Deputy Speaker. An armed robbery was reported at our new formal banking hub last week. I send my thoughts, of course, my warmest thoughts to the staff who endured that terrible event. Will she join me in thanking the officers who responded to the situation, but does she also agree with me that police confidence, that public confidence will grow in policing with more patrols in the future in the neighbourhoods?
I do agree with my honourable friend that people feel more confident if they know who their local police officers are, and that builds that sense of confidence, which also helps prevent crime.
Jim Shannon.
Deputy, can I thank very much the Secretary of State for the statement today and for the confidence that the Secretary of State very clearly is putting in our police officers. We all admire their courage, their bravery and what they do. Policing has devolved for Northern Ireland, as the Home Secretary will know, but the ramifications of this decision could be far-reaching. Last week I had the opportunity to speak to the Chief Constable of the PSNI, and this was one of the conversations that we had. Every police officer in Northern Ireland carries a weapon because of the high levels of threats for terrorism. Their lives are on the line. Every day they are on the beat. That's the life in Northern Ireland for a police officer. So it's very important that we recognise the threats. So has the Secretary of State, or will the Secretary of State perhaps maybe, have those discussions with the Chief Constable in Northern Ireland and also with the Policing and Finance Minister to discuss how these things can go forward to protect our police officers? That's critical. Thank you.
Thank the honourable member for that question, and interesting because some of the issues are very similar or the same around some of the accountability issues for England and Wales and for Northern Ireland. There are some areas where there are some differences which we have looked at and hope will be looked at further as part of the ongoing work and reviews that I have raised. But of course this is all fundamentally about how we make sure that we raise standards and also how we raise confidence and how we include that confidence for both officers and communities across the board.
John Slinger.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Does the Home Secretary agree with me that the overwhelming majority of police officers are a credit to our communities and our country? In my constituency of Rugby, I have always found that the commitment of senior and rank-and-file officers to protecting the public and taking on criminals is matched by their understanding that they must be held to the highest standards. Does my right honourable friend agree with me that our responsibility as politicians in this House and in our constituencies is to help all involved in achieving both of these important and interlinked objectives?
I do agree with my honourable friend. I think police officers across the country do a totally amazing job, and it's often a really difficult job. They keep us safe. They have to face difficult situations that none of us would want to be in. They also believe in high standards, and it's why so many police officers themselves and police chiefs end up want to make sure that the system is more effective at being able to root out those who do badly fail standards and who should not be serving in police. And that is something that police officers want in order to be able to maintain high standards. But they also want to know that where officers are doing their duty to keep us safe, where they're operating in line with their training and with the law, they also have our strong support, and that we make sure that that confidence works both ways, that we have confidence in policing and police have confidence to be able to do that difficult job to keep us safe.
Yeah. Not here for the absolute beginning, but she made it just in time for the opening statement, so I will call her Nessel Calliscan.
Thank you very, very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I'm grateful for calling me. Building trust and confidence in the police requires time and honest reflection about the challenges, alongside, of course, meaningful steps to improve things. And often, when there are high-profile incidents, there is a knee-jerk reaction that happens and a national debate is sparked. Does the Home Secretary agree with me that we must avoid those knee-jerk reactions, that there needs to be a long-term commitment to building trust and confidence, and that also that trust and confidence is built through not just effective policing for serious violent crime, but also so-called low-level crimes like antisocial behaviour and theft, for instance?
I do agree with my honourable friend that some issues around confidence are actually about the responsiveness of police and having the neighbourhood policing, that local response, but also that she's also right that we need to respond to things like the major reviews, like the Casey review, like the Angelini review, who also found failings around standards, around systems, around vetting, for example, to make sure that everything we do is responding to those broader reviews as well as recognising difficult individual incidents to boost confidence.
Well, that's the end of that statement. I'll allow the benches to swap over.